Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 281. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and this is a podcast where I interview thought leaders and game changers in the fields of trauma, addiction, mindfulness, and yoga with the goal of inspiring and educating anyone who works with individuals who've been impacted by trauma. Super excited you're here with me today. Here we go. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. And if this is your first time joining us here, welcome. When I first started out doing this podcast, my goal was to interview, I had this idea of interviewing like seasoned master trauma therapists. And slowly what I found was that there are a lot of people out there who are doing amazing work, who are really dedicating their lives to helping individuals who've been impacted by trauma. There are filmmakers, there are therapists and counselors of different kinds, yogis, for example. So, and furthermore, what's happened is I really realized that this podcast is ultimately about the human spirit, because the people I'm interviewing are, in a sense, on fire on a particular journey with themselves and with the people they're treating and healing. And today I'm really excited to have as my guest and back for a second time, Julia Rose. Julia, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again.
So Julia Rose is an adjunct professor of psychology at the University of the West and is founder and president of Trauma Camp, a professional development and consultation company that trains educators about trauma-informed and relationship-based approaches in the classroom. For over a decade, Julia Rose has been studying specifically the impacts of early childhood trauma on adult mental health and behavior. Some of this research culminating in her master's thesis entitled The Effects of Spanking on Mental Health and Why Clinicians Need to Know. In her work with clients over the years, Julia has consistently found that at the root of depression, anxiety, addiction, compulsion, and a range of other mental health issues is a childhood which involved one or more traumatic incidents that have yet to be acknowledged. Tremendous shifts occur when this is done, as it allows these wounds to begin to heal. All right, Julia, obviously that's just a little bit about you. Give us a little more about maybe your background, where you're calling from, where you're from, for those of our listeners who haven't heard to the first episode, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. I'm calling from Los Angeles. I live in the mid-city area, born and raised partially in Glendale, partially in La Cañada, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, and went to middle and high school in Seattle. So I've moved around quite a lot in my lifetime, but I'm back here in LA, and most of my family's out here too. So, and it's nice and sunny today, which is nice. Is a nice change from our quote unquote winter.
So we had talked a little bit about before we started recording about a quote that you have that maybe you'd like to share. Do you want to take the time and share that now?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll just share, like, as we were just chatting before the podcast, I was searching feverishly for a really deep and meaningful quote and couldn't find one. And sometimes you just gotta let the cookie crumble as it may. But this one has meant a lot to me in my life. And so it's one that I share both with my clients and also, now with listeners to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. It's by Moicanos, and I was searching for who this person is. I don't know who they are, but this quote is attributed to them. The longest journey you will ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart.
Ooh, I like that one.
Right?
Nice. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, this one has meant a lot for me, and I think is really applicable to healing from trauma because, we are, as we grow up in whatever environments we're raised in, we are provided with a narrative about who we are, what we're worth, what certain things mean. And that gets stored in our head. And oftentimes, especially when we've experienced violence or abuse or neglect, what is told to us cognitively is very different from how our body has experienced it. And so to really touch down into, the heart is kind of the keeper of truth in many regards. And so, I guess an example of this is when I first walked into the therapy room, I ended up writing my master's thesis largely on this topic about spanking, corporal punishment. When I first walked into a counseling office, I kind of bristled at the idea of, parents who didn't spank their kids. I thought it was weak. I was proud of my parents that they hit us. And it sounds odd, but there was this kind of cultural thing in my family where I had one aunt who had, just harped against the practice completely and was shouting from the rooftops how awful spanking was. And on the other hand, I had my parents. My mom was this kind of hippie woman, and my dad was just kind of a, Willy Loman type guy. And they were kind of like, who do you think you are? And so I adopted this narrative that spanking is good for me. And, I learned my lesson. And then this counselor, over time, it didn't all happen in the first session, but over time, she started asking me what it actually felt like to be hit as a child. And, I would evade that question for a lot of the sessions, and then finally was able to connect to how humiliating and painful and terrifying it was to be struck by a much larger person who was in a state of rage. And so I guess that's just one example. But that's essentially what trauma work is connecting our head to our heart and creating a narrative that incorporates and integrates our felt experience into our story.
One of the reasons why I asked you back here is because I felt that, and I feel that, the way you speak about your experience and your journey is in a very open way. And it's a lot of what I love about doing this podcast and what I kind of aspire to kind of emulate and stand for. And it's, it's one thing, Julia, right, to talk about these things, and it's another thing to actually to do them. And I guess my question for you is, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you back on here, is how did you get to this point? It's almost like I want to just squeeze out of you your essence in a sense, because not everyone shows up like this, right? But to me, it kind of resonates, and it really brings a fire to, I can only imagine the work you do individually and you have with groups and so forth. But how did you get to that point? It's almost like you're done with the BS and you're like, all right, let's get this,
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yes, I am, I didn't wake up like this. Unlike Beyonce. I did not wake up like this, but this unfoldment for me has been just an ongoing process of me more and more owning my truth. And, I guess me owning my story started in large part, going to counseling and having my truth there, and then learning to speak my truth with my siblings and have them hear it, and working with them in kind of relational repair work. Mm-hmm. Then it started when I was 16, I think, when I went to my first Al-Anon meeting. And there was a room full of strangers owning their truth. And I was like, oh my God, and then
what does that mean?
I started,
what does that mean?
yeah.
I mean, I can guess what that means, but for to kind of spell it out for our listeners, what do you mean when you say owning your truth?
What that looks like is if I am broken down and having a really awful time, saying that and feeling that and letting other people see me say and feel it. And so in the rooms of Al-Anon, it was people saying, my life is really chaotic and I love an alcoholic and it's destroying me. Like in the world I grew up with, those things just weren't talked about. Or sometimes if they were talked about, it was with this kind of intellectual analysis of, the woes of the world, but not really the felt experience of it. And so when I learned to own my reality, and again, this has taken like lots and lots and lots of practice. It involved, those strangers in the room and a series of, practitioners who helped me in identifying that my feelings and my truth are mine and they cannot be debated. And there's no right, there's no encyclopedia of, world or life experiences. I have mine. And to kind of, I kind of learned to fight for it in that way. And, I think I mentioned in our last one, that I originally sought out to be a talk show host, and I had these big visions for myself. And I think through my own process, what I came closer and closer and closer to through the work is that I don't want to live a life in which I have to pretend. And I don't want to have to live a life where it is more important to take care of other people's feelings than to speak my truth. And that's not to say I can speak my truth in a harmful way. It just means that I want to be, I kind of imagine the world as naturally going on the arc of healing, right? If you cut yourself, cut your leg, your body kind of knows what to do, right? And I just wanted to be one of those healing vessels, and we've had like glimpses of it and huge moments of it throughout the years. And I was like, this is my life. I want to live it in the way I want to. Yeah.
This aspect of owning your truth, why is that, or how is that important for someone who's doing this type of work, someone who's working with individuals who've been traumatized?
Well, for several reasons. First of all, the process of owning one's truth is highly threatening to the status quo. And so owning your truth isn't like a walk in a park. It's often terrifying for people, right? And that literally is the trauma work, reclaiming one's sense of self and selfhood. And so, for a lot of my clients to acknowledge that abuse happened in their families is like a process of months, if not years, right? It is not easy to say or acknowledge that. And so why this is important for clinicians is if you're used to sweeping things under the rug, then that's what you consciously or unconsciously are allowing your clients to do with their own truth. It gets swept under the rug. And I'm not saying that I'm, pushing clients to, become advocates about blah, 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 or like go, talk to their bosses about how they were abused. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying within the confines of the therapy room to support someone in, like I said, connecting with their felt truth and integrating that into their life story. I mean, that's the work. And so that matters to clinicians for the reason I just shared, but also, we can only take clients as far as we've gone. And if we don't know our own felt truth, then we as the tool are not operating on our highest capacity. And what I mean by that, what I guess that looks like in practice is, I'll be sitting across from somebody and, I'll hear some of the same things I said, violence wasn't that big of a deal, or, my mom would slam my head into a wall and, but, I got over it and, I'm fine. And remembering what that was like for me and what this process asked of me, I'm then able to decide, can I challenge that right now? Or does this person need to feel a little more trust for me before I can do that? Is this, obviously this is a defense and a adopted internalized oppression, but like I'm able to navigate my clinical options because of my own personal research. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And just let's play this out here for again, for our listeners here. If you hadn't done that, right? If you hadn't done that work, if you didn't have that self-awareness, what might have happened? What are the options there other ways that could have played out?
I think I might just take the story they walk in with as the, kind of fixed truth, unworthy of further exploration, right? So if someone's saying to me, the abuse wasn't a big deal, I don't even call it abuse, it was just parenting, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so then what else is going on in your life? And then we start focusing on work and the stresses at work. Then I have no bridge into the potential truths there that are fueling what else is going on in their life, right? And there's a point where enough. I had a teacher once say to me, if you can be objective, you don't have enough information, right? So if we know so much about childhood adversity and trauma that to hear an individual say, they were offended in whatever way as a child and that it hasn't affected them. If we can objectively say like, okay, maybe they, I think it's actively practicing ignorance or turning a blind eye,
Right. Right.
So that's what it might look like.
This idea of, I just want to come back to this idea of owning one's truth as a trauma worker, for example. In your experience, with your colleagues, maybe when you're in practice settings or so forth, is that something that people are doing from your experience actively? Is that something that a lot of clinicians are doing?
So yes and no. What I'm seeing a lot these days are this kind of gets into the whole discussion or debate around self-disclosure and boundaries around self-disclosure. And this is something I wrestle with. And so what I share is kind of where I am now. And, that may change a year from now or months from now. What I've seen is that therapists and social workers who are working in the world of addiction are much more inclined to self-disclose, because there is this understanding that, and this usually comes from the 12-step rooms, there's this understanding that we learn best from those who've done it before us, right? Someone who's trying to get sober is not going to necessarily be best served by a psychiatrist. They might be better served by someone who struggled to get sober themselves and has maintained it, right? And so in sharing one's experience, strength, and hope, there is what's considered to be of clinical value. Now, there are many others who are, I guess I would characterize this as from the old school, which, the therapist doesn't disclose any of that. I don't know, I think there are reasons for that, and there are really important boundaries that have been set for that. And what I know from my own experience as someone who went through chronic and complex childhood trauma, that when I walked into a room, I wasn't going to trust you if you didn't know what my life had looked like from your own experience. And, I've said this for a long time, the two most powerful words and the most shame-reducing words in the English language are "me too," right? And, this campaign is launched, the Me Too campaign, and it's powerful and stuff. And at its essence, the truth that you get what I'm talking about, that automatically suggests that I'm not crazy. And so, clinically speaking, like in the therapy room, this is how I build rapport, and this is how trust is earned, in part. And I gotta say, Guy, sometimes I'll come into my boss at work and I'll be like, I don't know if I should have shared that today. I don't know if it felt right. And, I don't know if that was really helpful, or, maybe I needed to have said this, and maybe I left her hanging because I didn't share that I had, that I understood. And, I don't have a clear answer, and I'm constantly rubbing against myself in terms of, I never want to hijack the spotlight from the client's work. And I also, don't want to leave them alone in that spotlight, especially when talking about this stuff. Right. So I'm navigating it.
Well, it's certainly a good point. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking back, of the over now 260 interviews I've done with people who are doing the same thing or doing this work. I can't think of one person who hasn't said or hasn't corroborated what you just said. In other words, I can't think of one person who said, it's when you're dealing with trauma, it's very important to just maintain this blank slate. It's very important to just keep to not share, to not be human, because basically what you're talking about here is really, being human, or as one of my guests, Manuela Mishka-Reeds, has said, it's about full human beingness. So I completely agree, and that's not easy to do. As we've been talking about here, owning your truth brings up all these different kind of red flags for people who are doing this work.
Yes. I mean, it brings up red flags in terms of someone speaking up against their family. It brings up red flags in clinicians speaking to their colleagues or their employers. I remember in one of my early training experiences, I was like juggling a lot of different potential theoretical orientations that I was interested in, and our supervisors had asked us which one we're going to do, and I had learned about Roberto Assazioli, and he's really linked to Jung, except he, incorporates some degree of spirituality in his work. And my supervisors, after I shared this in a supervision session, pulled me aside and said, "We never bring religion into the room." Mm-hmm. And this is my first, this is my first training experience. And I was just floored. And I was like, I'm concerned you might have mischaracterized what I was saying. I said I was excited about this theory. I had not done anything. And, I think about it now and I'm like, I would have much more of a voice about that, which is, that's a complex part of who people are. And can we entertain the thought that this might be actually beneficial to them? Should they already have some sense of it? Anyway, that's a whole nother debate, but it's this kind of owning one's truth happens at the internship site with our supervisors, with our employers. So
what other ways you talked about, there were, owning your truth didn't just happen in the first session magically with your therapist, but how does one practice that? I mean, what are some things that one can do?
So I think what you just said, the word practice, is perhaps the most important. And when I say that, I mean literally practicing with another person. And so what that looked like for me was, someone would have said something to me that I was offended by or really hurt by, and my counselor would help me kind of use the feedback loop. When you said this, what I made up about this is blank, and about that I feel this, and in the future my preference would be this, right? And so literally practicing writing out and speaking my reality. And I would start this with my brothers and family counseling. I started doing this with my parents, which, for better or worse, was challenging, very challenging, for them to take in at times and for me to say. What it actually looked like too is me learning how to say no and stop, and I'm not okay with that, right? Those are very concrete truth-telling statements. And, I remember I was having this conversation with a family member, and this person had and has mental illness and had not taken their medication one day, and she went into a place of rage where she was face red, kind of spitting at me, and not literally, but spittle coming out of her mouth, and yelling at me and accusing me and calling me a spoiled brat. And I remember I practiced this enough time. This was kind of my David and Goliath moment. And I said in a very firm and calm way, "I will not be spoken to in that way." And she kind of rolled her eyes and kept going. And I said, "I will not be spoken to in that way. And if you continue to speak to me in this way, I will have to leave." And I tell you, it was like I felt the muscle of myself growing at that moment. And once I did that, I knew that I had that muscle and that I could do that when I needed to.
Wow.
And that's something I had practiced a lot in therapy, like role play, and finally the opportunity came and I was able to use it. So that's what I mean by practice.
And you can just feel how, that what it's like to be in the presence of someone who's practicing owning their truth. There's there's a groundedness there, there's a comfortability there, there's almost a fearlessness there, right? Of not treating the therapeutic relationship like this glass ball, but rather this orb of clay that it will survive. It'll survive if it's dropped. It might get a little nicked here, but that's okay. We can learn from that. And that is what I love about what you're talking about here, because it so jumps out from or extends beyond the therapeutic relationship, and it's about us as human beings. You're talking about your experience, not with a client, but with a family member or a relative. And that's just, when you were talking about that, I was getting goosebumps, just like, I will not be taught. That's like you're putting a stake in the ground about your truth.
Yes. And I just got clarity about something. This is why being able to own my truth as a therapist is also really important, because when I'm working with clients and I'm teaching them the feedback loop and I'm inviting them to have their voice, they need to know that this is not something that, I'm having them do for just to fill their time in treatment. This is literally something that they can do out in the world. And so this is the story I just shared with you is something I've shared with them, because they need to know that I too, at one point, was voiceless, and this is not the person they experience today. And so it's, again, one of the things trauma robs us of is hope that anything can be different or that it can change. Right. And so this is me being able to say, I did this too, allows them to see that the bridge, like you can cross the bridge to this other way of being.
Yeah. I love it. I'm just aware of the time. Julia, I knew I was a genius for having you back on here.
Thank you.
I knew it. I just knew it.
You're a genius.
Look, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Where and how can people get in contact with you? What's the best way?
www.juliarosepolktherapy.com.
Okay.
Or www.traumacamp.com. And you can also reach me at juliarose.polk@gmail.com.
Okay. And I'll have all that listed up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Julia, love it. Love you. You're awesome. Really, really appreciate you coming back on here. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good, Guy. Thank you.
Bye. Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, you're passionate about this work, and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges, and share your wins, to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com.